So in this segment, we're going to cover how to create a sample application and also focus on looking at the Android Studio environment. So basically, the general idea is that we can look at the directory structure of a project. We can look at the ID configuration, use some controls, set up and run an application. So let me go ahead and launch the Android Dev Studio. So the product, when it starts, it gives this first window. So one of the things we want to make sure before we work on our application is that all the necessary development packages are installed correctly and functioning properly. So for doing and checking something like this, I want to go into the SDK Manager, and I'm going to look at all the things that are installed. For the current configuration, I've set up Android API 22, and for backward compatibility, I went ahead and installed 21, 20, and 19 as well. Of course, I've also installed some additional tools like the generic Google USB driver in case I'm trying to do debugging with an actual Android device, and support library and the Google repository. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and create a project, and once the project has been created, we will explore the Android environment and test run an application. So the first step in the development process is to create a new project, and so you get this welcome screen. You're basically now ready to create a new project by simply going back and clicking on Start a New Android Project. So once you get this little screen, you can you basically have a project wizard. So we will create a custom app here, and we can call this, say, Lab 1, and we can use set up a company domain and basically click on next, and then I basically have to go in and check out the work with the settings. In the previous screen, when we are talking about the company domain, generally, if you type your company domain, then the package name is reversed based on the domain settings that you go ahead and set up. Project location generally is whatever the default location you will have, and then we get to these different form factors screen. So you can create apps for all of these, phone and tablet. Here the minimum SDK choice is Android. It's also that if I choose when I choose an API, it tells me the percentage of devices on which my app will run properly. So the higher the SDK selection, the more the application will be restricted to the newer devices. So depending on how you make the choices, this if I go in and, for example, choose API 22, the system will actually tell me that less than 1% of the apps can run, or less than 1% of the devices can run this. So the idea is to always try and use the lowest version possible and decide. The decision can also be impacted by if there are certain features that are available in a newer version of Android, then you might consider providing them. So then the next thing is we have to create an activity. So an initial activity is created for an application. We have a range of these available activities. We're just for now going to go ahead and use a blank activity. And these other activity types we will cover as more examples are covered in the future. So we can name this activity, we'll leave it as main activity. And this activity will consist of a single user interface screen layout, which for the purposes of this example can be named whatever name, actually the layout name we can choose as activity main. Then we can click on finish and the project creation process will run through. And the project will be created in a moment. So now Android Studio has essentially created a minimal example application, and it's essentially opened the main window, as you can see. So this is what my app looks like. So there are several files that are associated with the project structure, and it's on the left-hand side of the menu. The project has several modes. By default, the mode that we are thinking of is the Android mode. So I also have the project mode and the package mode. The setting is controlled by this drop-down menu. And if, let's say, being in Android mode allows you to basically develop the application. If I put it in package mode, then I can see all the packages. If I put this in project mode, then I can see the project structure. And if I put it in Android mode, then I can see the entire Android app structure. So this is our basic Hello World application. So the Hello World app is created every time when you create the app. So the next thing to do is that we want to modify the UI a little bit. So it can display a large text view object with some message. So as you can see, the user interface is in this activity main.xml file, which is under app folder, and then the res folder, and then layout. So this file is open by default automatically. So I can open it, and then I get into what is basically the UI designer. So right now you can see that in the designer window is set to Nexus 4, which is the device that is reflected in the visual representation of the application. Obviously, there's a wide variety of device options available, and you can use this menu to change that. If you want to change the orientation of the device between portrait or landscape, then you can use this button to change the orientation to portrait or landscape. Looking at the left side of the panel is a palette containing different categories of user interface components that can be used to build an interface, such as buttons, labels, and text fields. So not all of these components are visible to the user. For example, the layout category, none of these are visible to the users. The idea of having several different types of layouts is so you can position the controls and manage the screens. The layout that we are currently using is called the relative layout. That's the default layout that is given for each activity. The way to confirm that we are using relative layout, this can be confirmed by using the component tree panel, which by default is located on this top right-hand corner of the panel. So here you can see there is a device screen, there is the relative layout, and then the text view. So the first step in modifying an app is that we're going to go ahead and delete this text view control from the design by we can either click on the object and delete it, or we can go to this palette and say delete it. So that should basically get rid of the control. What I'm going to go ahead and do is take this large text object and drop it into maybe the center of the user interface. So you can see this thing is a little bit unstable in the sense that even though I've got the UI and I've deleted that object, the large text is not quite visible. But I dropped it in the middle of the screen. So with the drag and drop, if the UI does not tend to refresh, I can simply hit the refresh button and then it will show me the text. So what I can do is either double click on the object and I can add a string. So when I modify the value, you can see that there is this little light bulb that poses a little bit of a problem, and it says that I have a hard-coded string. I should be using the add string resource. So this message is informing us that it's a potential issue, and the fact that the internationalization of the project might become hard because the warning is basically telling us that the attributes and values such as the text string in the text view should be declared separately, and doing so enables the change of the appearance of the application. The changes that are made to the appearance of the application are kept separate, and the value set is also kept separate. So to fix this issue, I will go ahead and introduce basically I will add a value. So I'll set the resource to text large 1, and I'm basically going to do an entry in strings.xml. And at this point, my declaration has changed, and I've declared a variable. And basically, what I'm saying is that to populate the caption of this, I'm going to use a variable called text large 1. So if I go into values in strings.xml, you can see I have text large 1, and the value that is to be populated is right there. And I can always come in and modify the value here at any time. The fun part of doing this is that the variable names are saved separately, and if I were to internationalize my app, I can any day basically do a translation of this text, and my app is ready to go. It's totally internationalized and then localized to a specific language. So I can go in and change the string. I can go ahead and change the string, the values, and I can go back to my activity, and you can see the modification into in the component tree and using the add string naming convention. So the designer tool, it basically provides a user-friendly way to edit the user interface, but there is also this text mode that allows me to basically look at the XML code for the change, for the UI changes that I'm making. There is really no reason for us to modify the XML file directly, but in some instances, you may actually find that it is much easier to modify the values here, just because it's it can be time prohibitive to just modify the UI in the user interface or the designer. So modifying the text file might be somewhat faster. So you can see in the structure that there is a relative layout. I've also got a text view object, and as you vary the complexity and content of the user interface layout, these elements will get modified. the setup of the XML file and the components is hierarchical. So another feature that you can see is this preview panel in the Android Studio, which is really a powerful feature. It gives you the current visual state of the layout. So as you make changes to the XML layout, so if I were to, for example, add a background color, or if I were to modify so if I were to go in and say Android dot, so if I were to say something like Android dot background, excuse me, Android colon background, and I can basically perhaps just hard code a color. And you can see that as I made that small change, the color in the designer got modified to basically match whatever value I specified in the XML file. So you always get kind of this visual cue from the preview panel. Finally, you can look at the strings.xml file to basically look at all the values that have been set up. I've talked a little bit about that already. So we can change the string values here back to and if I go back and look at my activity main, right? If I go into the design mode, you can see the changes. So previewing the layout is somewhat cool. So I can also maybe try to change this to like a smaller form factor like the Galaxy Nexus, and the app will actually change. I think most of the apps by default created are on Nexus 7 or Nexus 4, I think it was. So one other thing that's immensely useful is if you wanted to preview all screen sizes, then you can more or less get a sense of all the different screen sizes. It takes a little while to render. And I guess I'm going to remove that background color, as that seems to be a little bit of noise. So you can see all these colors, all these different screen sizes in the given background color. So I'm shifting back to I think just I'm going to remove the previews and just look at the basic preview that is set up. So before I run the application, I want to go through the main user interface. So you've got our basically our top menu bar on the top side, which is for it's got a range of menus for performing tasks with the Android Studio. Then we have So I've got my top menu bar, I've got my set of shortcuts, and then I've also got my navigation bar. Depending on what I'm looking at, there is this navigation bar showing a variety of files that I may want to look through. You have your editor window, and I guess one of the most important things is the status bar. In the bottom here, in the status bar, you're going to get basically informational messages about the project and the activities of the Android Studio. So you can hover over different items here, and you can see basically description. I mean, you can pretty much see the different tools in play. That's my terminal mode. Messages from the Android VM, general compile messages. If I'm running an application, then configuration of my Android device and what the actions are displayed here. So then I have my project tool window, which provides me with a hierarchical view of the project file structure. And the drop-down menu in the toolbar can be used for displaying basically for displaying a number of projects that I may have. Right now I just have the two, or just the one. So in addition to the things that you see here, there is also a set of tools that are available. If you go to the bottom left of the screen, bottom left of the status bar, you can see all these different tools. And selecting an item from the quick access menu will cause the corresponding tool window to appear as the main window. So if I wanted to look at the Android, or if I wanted to look at the terminal, or if I want to look at the commander, so all these different windows will end up changing depending on the selection that I make. And a lot of these tools might either appear in the bottom or to the right side. So if I open up the terminal window, a little click here will make it disappear. So that is just navigating the different parts of the user interface. So in addition to the tools that you see here, there are different orientations that are made available. So if I wanted to explore the just the project details or the structure of this project, I have these basically different layouts available. The project provides an overview of the file structure that makes up the project, allowing for quick navigation between files. And you can essentially double click on any one of these files to open it and view the things. The structure, there's no structure for this particular view, but the structure tool provides a high-level view of the structure of the source files currently displayed in the that are currently maybe displayed in the editor. So there are items like classes and methods and all of that, and since we don't have much code, there is not much to show right now. So there are, just to kind of look at the tools, we also have one called build variants, and this basically is a quick way to configure different build targets for the current application. So if you're trying to do some debugging, you can add different types of targets here. There is a tool called To Do where you can basically maintain you can review items that have yet to be completed in the project. So it helps you kind of compile a to-do list of files that you either need to review, etc. There is also another tool called Messages, and this shows all the issues or all the messages that are thrown out by the Gradle build system. There is also a tool called Android that pretty much gets us into the Android debugging system. So within this window, you can see tasks and monitor the log output for a running application. Like if you end up stopping a process, starting a process, etc. Then there is, then there is a terminal window, which basically is a it's a command prompt for the local operating system. The run tool, which we will end up using, becomes available when an application is currently running, and it provides results of whatever you're running. If you end up, if you want an option to start or stop an application, you can do that. Or if an application fails to install or run on a device, the window will typically have some diagnostic information to go in and fix. So this is what the run logs looks like. Then there is something called an event log. That's another tool. And this basically displays messages to events and activities within the Android Studio. There is also a Gradle Console, which talks about all the output from the build system. If you end up using a project management tool, there is this Maven projects. If you're doing some complex projects, then you've got an underlying build system for Android development that you can use. You also have another tool called Gradle, which basically the Gradle console provides, or the Gradle tool window provides a view into the Gradle tasks. And so if you wanted to look at the details of the Gradle console tool, I mean, the Gradle console is right here, but the Gradle tool shows you the way the app is built. But if I go at the very top of this and say open Gradle config, it basically loads the Gradle build file for the current project, and this can essentially be modified if you're trying to do if you have some specific build needs. We also have a commander tool, at any time, if you want, if let's say you're in different views, you can use the commander tool to basically get you back into the mode of knowing the project and structure tool windows together. So you can see the project and the structure essentially together. Then finally, there is a tool called the memory monitor. And so you can here basically see how much memory. This tool interacts with Android applications and memory usage statistics, and it will draw out essentially a real graph of the information. So one other thing is that if you want your Android Studio theme to look somewhat different, you can go under File and Settings, and you can go to Appearance, and you can in the theme menu use a different theme. So for example, if I set this to Dracula or perhaps maybe something different. I think I like let's try the windows, see how that looks. And this kind of looks normal to me, so I'd like to just keep it like this. One more thing I want to show you guys is how to build a Android virtual device. So it becomes necessary to compile and run the program multiple times sometimes. So, and if you're not running on a physical device, then creating and using the AVD emulator is really useful. So we need to have a configuration in mind for our the virtual device that we want to make. So we will go to the AVD Manager to try and build any of the virtual devices for our needs. So AVDs are essentially emulators that allow you to run Android apps that you need to test with the necessity of installing an app on a physical Android device. So it can be, AVD can be configured to emulate different types of hardware, screen size, memory capacity, and also presence of certain features like camera, GPS navigation, or accelerometer type things can be controlled. So there are a couple of these AVDs already installed, but we can also go in and create our own based on the couple that are created, or just go ahead and create something totally brand new. So to create an AVD, I can actually go in and either, let's try this. If I go into my terminal and I say Android AVD, I guess it says it's a bad command or file name. So I guess I should, for at least now, I'll go in and say Tools, Android, and then AVD Manager. I think I just need to set my path correctly in order for my command line things to work. So what we can do is basically say create a virtual device, and I can select a category if I want something for tablet, a wearable, a phone, or a TV. So I'm going to, for now, at least select the tablet option, and maybe I'll use Nexus 7. And then I guess I'll click on next and try to use a a reasonable system image. So I'm going to select the latest version of Android for this one, and then I can enter a name for this. I guess it came up with a meaningful name, and then I'll just click on finish. I can also have a auto scaling. I can also use either use the host GPU, or I can also save a snapshot, so any changes I make to this virtual device can be saved. So, and then there are advanced settings where I can control some of these factors. Like if I want to enable the camera, both front and back, control the size of the memory. I can set these all up here. So I'll go ahead and click on finish, and it will go ahead and build my virtual device, which is right there. So now I can start the emulator by hitting this little triangle, and so after creating the virtual device, I went ahead and started it, and it takes a few seconds for the device to start, but this is what it looks like. And once the device comes up, it will be like a normal Android device that we can run applications in. First time around, when the Android virtual device is started, it can take a few minutes, but if you end up saving a snapshot, then the future runs of the Android virtual device will tend to be a lot faster. So as you can see now, the Android device has started, and I just need to swipe up to basically unlock the device, and now I can start seeing all the applications that are running on this system. So okay, so now we are ready to run the application. Now that we have created a virtual device, the virtual device is still sitting there. So I'm going to go ahead and run this application, and it prompts me for which emulator I want to use. Since this one is already running, I'm going to choose a running device, or I can choose to launch an emulator, which will take another few minutes. So if I click on OK, what the system is doing is it's compiled a APK file, which it's loading into the application. And the app that is at hand is essentially going to be loaded and executed. So this is the first app. It essentially got loaded, and I can go in and try to run it from the menus. There is lab 1, and if I go ahead and run the app, it will launch the window and it basically shows hello world to anyone that says hello. This was the point of doing the full show and tell. So a particular project can be configured such that a specific device or emulator is used automatically each time when you run a project from the Android Studio. So you can go under here under App and Edit Configuration, and you can modify the run and debug configurations all here basically. So in the Run Debug Configuration tab, the application may be configured in a way so you have either a preferred emulator that you want to use. If you have specific target device section, so for preferred emulator, you can just select a few that you have created. So if you want to, when you are running applications for test purposes, if you want to go in and stop a running application, you can simply terminate the emulator and that will stop running the application. So you can go into the Android tool window and so we basically have this Android debug environment. So once you have this window, you can go in and select the device at hand, and it tells you a list of all the processes that are currently actively running on the device. And you can, for debugging purposes, go in and select the process at hand, and then you can right-click and try to, I'm sorry, not right-click, but use the use this terminate button to stop the application. So you can, from your the active device, you have a ton of control here. So these are the buttons in the vertical toolbar that deal with a set of processes. So you can also open the Android debug monitor. So another thing is, if I want to look at my Android virtual device configuration files, I can go into my home directory. There's a file called .android/avd, and I can see all the configuration files for each associated, for each that I have here. So like I just created a device today, and you can see the configuration file basically sitting here. So if I look in this folder, I'm going to find the configuration settings here. So there's a file called config.ini, and if I actually open that with a proper editor, you'll see that the options and all those things that I've chosen are right there. And then if I also try to create a snapshot, then I'll have the disk image files, and this helps in the running of the device fairly quickly. So all of this stuff that we have talked about in this shows us the typical development process, how you code, compile, and run in a test environment. You can go ahead and test applications. You can test applications in the EVD emulator, or you can also create a tool and then deploy it on an actual device and try to run that application.